Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Every year around this time, when my neighbors put up their inflatable Disney Halloween decorations, I know that spooky season has begun. Halloween, couple days away. Yeah. Oh, you want to come over and borrow some movies? My movies? My buddy knows I have an extensive physical media collection, and he calls up and he asks, well, can I borrow your discs? Like from my collection of films? So he says, dude, I want to borrow these movies from you. Like some of my really rare 4K discs that I've bought from all over the world that are special editions and sold out everywhere. You want to borrow some of those? And which movies does he want to borrow from me? Well, it's a collection of both old and new classics that he knows that I have on physical media.
This beautiful UK version of Joe Dante's The Howling. This amazing Australian edition of Talk to Me. Not only do I have this, but I also have this. Uh-oh. He also wants to borrow Suspiria. Then there's 1981's Possession. I mean, my God, he's got good taste. Sam Neill and Isabelle Adjani. Ooh, this movie. And then the incredible Where Evil Lurks. If you haven't seen this, do yourself a favor. And then, of course, this banger from 1973. The Wicker Man. Now, do you think that I would possibly loan out this beautiful special edition to anybody?
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. The answer to that question is no. No one, and I mean no one, ever touches my physical media. Yeah, so the answer is gonna be a big negatory, good buddy, on that one. However, there is a place that is terrifyingly scary. One of the scariest places you can go. And you can go there right now. You know, you're gonna have to do some work. You're gonna have to go there. You're gonna have to do, I'll tell you where you have to go. Because this month, this scary realm is having a Fright Fest. And coincidentally, they've added all those movies I just showed to their lineup. You can get a very curated, a very bespoke collection of the finest horror films of all time.
This actually isn't it. It's the taco stand next door, but it is scary.
Where I am is one of the scariest places you could possibly go.
And where exactly is this place? It's a place near and dear to us, a place we've been going to since childhood. That's right, the library. And did you know the library has its own streaming service? It's called Canopy with a K. And underneath that canopy is all kinds of streaming entertainment. The best movies, documentaries, the best educational programs, and yes, the best horror. Canopy is only available through participating libraries, so you need to be a member. Students and faculty at participating colleges and universities can also get a Canopy membership. Fright Fest is happening right now, and the selection of films is ferocious. Get down to the local library and get yourself a library card.
Yes.
Or you could just go to canopy.com if you wanted to, but that's no fun.
And check out one of the greatest curated collections of horror classics ever made. Right there, free of charge, ready to watch, right now.
I better be going.
I'll see you out. What will your testimony be at the inquest tomorrow?
The truth, I suppose.
Truth is relative. Even off the force, a fella can use a little help. Have you decided what line of work you'll be going into?
I only have the one trade.
What do you mean?
I'm a cop. A detective. I'm going private, that's all.
Who with? The Pinkertons? You got something lined up?
Just my own little agency.
I see. When were you planning on getting started?
Well, right away.
Oh, that's a shame. That really is.
How so?
Oh, the paperwork on these matters. A goddamn shame. Red tape. Sometimes an application for a license can be turned down for the most trivial of reasons. For no reason at all, actually.
So that's how it is.
I'll tell you how it is, Mr. Heller. Go out of the department under a cloud and you tie yourself up in a police scandal. Months go by, And you're not going to get your private detective's license till it's over. Till maybe, not never.
Suppose I agree to corroborate Lang and Miller's story.
I'm good at cutting red tape.
How good?
You'll have your license tomorrow, good.
And when the trial comes up, suppose I pull a double cross. Suppose I tell a different story, like the real one.
I don't think you do that. You're not a stupid man. Licenses get revoked for no good reason sometimes. The mayor giveth, and the mayor taketh the fuck away.
Shit. God damn it. I'll do it.
Thought you might. Sergeant Miller, get yourself a good night's sleep, Mr. Heller. Nate, you have a busy day tomorrow. Sergeant Miller here will see you home.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. What was that? It is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Rob casting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is, of course, Robservations episode number 994. Now, for those of you who are interested in appearing on the 1000th show, which is, after all, about you, it's going to be a 16-hour-plus show, I kid you not, interspersed with some interviews, to give me a chance to take a potty break or get some food, what have you. But if you want to be on the show and have a discussion, we'll have a 20-minute, half-hour discussion about a topic of your choice. Send me an email at rmburnett, that's RMBURNETT, 1701 at gmail.com, and put in the subject headline, Robservations 1000, and give me a brief description of what you want to talk about. And make sure, even though I've got an email from you, put your email in the body of the email somewhere, and your phone number, so I can get in touch with you. I'm going to try and schedule out a schedule. Now, that's 6 shows from now. Now, here's the thing. I am in the middle. This week, I will finish True Noir. And by the way, somebody asked if that was Wayoon. That is indeed Michael Rosenbaum. And that is, of course, Jeffrey Combs, who plays Anton Cermak. That was a clip from True Noir, which the first episodes are going to be completed this week. By Friday night, they will be done, which is very, very exciting. Hopefully, we will be launching them on November 8th. People from the Kickstarter will get them first before anybody else, and you will be able to then, it'll be a premium offering. Each episode will be $2.99, but a bargain. We put a lot into it. We have to get something back so we can make more. And I would appreciate it if no one pirates it or anything like that. We definitely need your support. So I don't know if it's going to be that week or I'll have to push it. We'll have to see. But the 1000 show is coming up, and hopefully whoever wants to participate will. It'll all be about you, because you are, after all, the imagination connoisseurs that makes everything go. It's funny. Today, of course, I'm always looking for something to talk about. There's always a lot on my mind, but I feel like half the stuff that I think about, even though it's usually entertainment related, most people wouldn't be that interested in what's floating through the transom of my mind or my subconscious, what have you. But today, of course, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Variety drops an article as their top story. Actually, it was at 2:38 this afternoon, if you want to be absolutely correct about it. And I'm like, well, I've got to talk about this episode or this article. Why wouldn't I?
finally, I guess Variety has now decided to codify the fact that we are in the midst of superhero fatigue, or super burnout, as they are calling it, which, we've been talking about for quite some time. Is there such a thing? We've heard and talked about how other genres, like the Western, burned out after how many Westerns did they make over the course of four decades or something? A lot. But then people get tired of a genre and then it burns out. I maintain that that's not the only reason. I mean, obviously a genre does become overly familiar, but I think what ends up happening is that it's just very hard to sustain things creatively. But this article kind of lays it out. And I think, let me just, I have to say that from my perspective, I saw Superman the movie in the theater. I was 11 years old. I saw it at the John Dance Theater in Bellevue, Washington, a big box, giant screen theater. It was also the headquarters of SRO, the Sterling Recreation Organization that had a lot of movie theaters in the Pacific Northwest. They were a great, great, great theater chain. The Factoria Cinemas is still there. That was one of them. That was an SRO theater chain. And the John Dance Theater was this gigantic, it was, big 70 millimeter house. Growing up, I saw everything from Somebody Killed Her Husband to The Spy Who Loved Me when it opened originally, to Star Trek the Motion Picture. You name it. And I saw Superman the movie there. So I have always enjoyed a large-scale superhero experience on the big screen, but they were fleeting. Admittedly, Superman was really, in terms of a big studio release, it was the only one. And then, of course, that was in 78. And then, of course, in 89, the summer of 89, we got Tim Burton's Batman. It's crazy to me to think that Tim Burton's Batman was only 11 years after Superman, Richard Donner's Superman the movie. It seems like it was a totally different generation, and I guess indeed it was if it was 11 years. But then, of course, as we moved into the 90s, after the 80s call it a comic renaissance, call it a comics explosion, beginning in the early 80s with the direct sale market and things like Camelot 3000 and Frank Miller's Ronin, and when Marvel started their direct sale titles that you could only buy at the comic book store, like Moon Knight, Kazar, and Micronauts, and then DC released their Baxter versions of things like Legion of Superheroes and New Teen Titans, the Perez, Marv Wolfman comic book, when it made the transition from newsprint to Baxter paper. That was actually very pretty, very, very pretty. Great era in comics. And in the wake of that, whether you want to talk about Crisis on Infinite Earths, whether you want to talk about Watchmen, whether you want to talk about John Byrne's Superman, George Perez's Wonder Woman, comics were big. They were getting huge. And by the time we got to the late 90s when the late 80s when Tim Burton's Batman came out, DC, there was the beginnings of the Vertigo line and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. And we started to see a respectability come into the comic medium in terms of the books, comic books. The respectability comics as literature. Art Spiegelman's Mouse, for instance. And you had things like Cerebus. And I liked Omaha the Cat Dancer. I don't know where that fits in, but hey, if you know what that is, hey, if you're a furry, you must love Omaha the Cat Dancer. I know I did, and I'm not a furry. But there was all kinds of things. Howard Chaykin's American Flag. So the door had been opened for respectability for comic book related films. And in the 90s, I think the first one to me that really, Superman and Batman were sort of one-offs. They didn't lead to a renaissance in terms of superheroes on film. I think what started to happen, obviously Burton made one other Batman movie, and then we had the Schumacher era, and that was kind of an era of diminishing returns. But for me, one of the Renaissance movies, and something to looked at that's celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, is, of course, Alex Proyas's The Crow, based on the James O'Barr comics. And then a couple of years later, we ended up getting Blade, the first Blade, Stephen Norrington's Blade. And by the time we got to 2000, of course, Bryan Singer's first X-Men. And the funny thing about X-Men was, Bryan was always under the gun. He was coming off of Apt Pupil, which was sort of a return. He had done Usual Suspects, and then of course he'd done Public Access, Usual Suspects, and Apt Pupil, and then that sort of paved the way because he directed a great ensemble in Suspects. He was then offered X-Men, but it was a film that was only a $75 million movie.
but he brought a gravitas to it. Opening a superhero movie at that time at a concentration camp was not something people would normally have thought to do. And of course, Lauren Schuler Donner, who was one of the producers on the movie, Dick Donner's wife, didn't think the movie was going to be at all successful, to the point where she didn't attend the Ellis Island premiere of the film because she was worried about the approach. It wasn't comic bookish enough. But then, of course, after that film opened, it had a huge opening at the time. It opened, I think, $54 million. That was a huge opening at the time. Huge opening. One of the biggest ever at the time. And then, of course, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and then we were off to the races. And, of course, 8 years after that, the MCU began. And a couple years after that, we saw Man of Steel come out. And, of course, in 2005, a year before Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, we had, a year before Superman Returns, Brian's Superman Returns, we had Batman Begins, is what I meant to say. In 2005, we had Batman Begins, Nolan's Batman series, and then we had all kinds of things. People forget. We had Ghost Rider, we had Elektra. There was a spinoff from Daredevil. They made an Elektra movie. Who would have thunk? They even made a Man-Thing movie. People forget about that. Kevin Feige, of course, was a producing entity on 14 different Marvel movies before he started the MCU, including that Man-Thing film. So he really got to see what worked and what didn't, and then Marvel Studios became its own entity at Paramount. I don't need to recount the history. But from, starting in 2008, the entire Infinity Saga was I think, a very carefully crafted, probably not as careful as we might. It wasn't probably, a lot of it was luck and happenstance and all that, but I do think that the Infinity Saga, the 23 Infinity movies ending with Spider-Man Far From Home, is a monumental achievement, perhaps maybe the most monumental achievement in fantasy cinema, those 23 movies. I know people like some better than others. Some things are not your cup of tea. I think I like Captain Marvel more than most people, but we were also able to get the biggest, if you're talking about a big trick that was pulled, I was always worried when those movies started, could they make Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor their cornerstones? Could they make audiences, and Hulk to a certain extent, but those three characters, would you believe that they all existed in the same universe? And they did a very smart thing by grounding that universe by making Iron Man first. Iron Man was just a dude. Just a smart dude, and it was audacious for Jon Favreau and Kevin Feige to allow Robert Downey Jr. to be cast, and it was sort of the beginning, doing things like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Shane Black, who later went on to do Iron Man 3 with him. But it was audacious, and it was an amazing thing, and no one knew if that movie was going to be successful, and $500 million later, ba-bam, the MCU was off and running. Marvel then went to Universal, and they made a Hulk movie, and of course they made Thor, and they made Captain America the First Avenger, and Iron Man 2, and Thor the Dark World, and then of course leading up to the Avengers, and that was all she wrote. We had now officially entered an era where Avengers could make $1.5 billion, putting superhero movies on the top of the pile. There's your Michael Pena brief recap of the history of the superhero film. But it was an interesting time for me. I mean, having grown up and read comics, I thought that the thought put into the MCU, everything from the design of costumes to the reimagining of the universe. Like, I was never one of those people that's like, well, it wasn't like the comics. Well, it didn't happen this way in the comics. I never thought that, because when you're translating something to a different medium, the thing about comic books is there's a certain verisimilitude within the pages of a comic, but for the most part, there are things and themes and concepts within comic books that aren't part of real life, and there are things in comic books I don't think that should have necessarily been brought into live action. I think the greatest, I will go on record, I think the greatest misstep the MCU ever made was not the multiverse, but was bringing in the TVA. I think for me, the TVA shattered the verisimilitude, the carefully constructed verisimilitude of the MCU. I don't think the TVA belongs. I mean, it's too late now. What can you do? It's there. Now that we've had it in Loki and we've had it in Deadpool and Wolverine. But I think that was a mistake. I think that the TVA was it was a comic book idea that works better on the pages of a 4-color fantasy than it does on this big screen because it's too goofy. And the way it was presented, they did not try and make it, they tried to make everything else realistic, that you buy into everything, but the TVA, the way it was presented, it was too whimsical, if that makes any sense. And it didn't work. It didn't work for me. I know some people probably didn't care, but I think overall, the whole idea of leaning into the multiverse in the second big phase of Marvel after the Infinity Saga to go into the multiverse saga, big mistake. Big mistake. Because what they should have done, if I was in charge, and I'm not, but if I was, what I would have delved into is how did the world change post Thanos snap? What was going on there? And that's the kind of thing that I would have been most interested in delving into. Because once you have the snap happen, if humanity and the world was altered, irrevocably altered, and it was, how then would have humanity dealt with it? What would we have learned from that experience? And then with this new version of, I guess my hair's dried enough, with this new version of humanity, how would then metahumans continue on Earth? And rather than lean into the multiverse, lean into how humanity itself changed and how that changed superheroics. And I think a big problem with phases 4 and 5 of the MCU is humanity didn't seem to really care. You got Celestials coming out of the Indian Ocean. You've got Arishem the Judge talking to the people of Earth. You have the Eternals fighting deviants. You have all this stuff going on, and then you have humanity's like, yeah, we got blipped into oblivion for 5 years, but that doesn't seem to really matter. Everyone goes back to normal, which wouldn't happen. And I think that once we've become part of that larger universe, what would that mean to humanity? What would that say to anybody? They didn't delve into any of that. Going right into the multiverse saga. Again, the multiverse shattered the verisimilitude, the carefully constructed verisimilitude of the MCU. Now I'm just opining, but it just doesn't work because once you have the multiverse, to be honest, who cares? Who cares? Nobody cares. If there's the multiverse, there are no stakes. I mean, you can watch, and then they did things like in Multiverse of Madness, watching Wanda destroy the Illuminati made all those characters. It means that any other character you meet in the multiverse isn't worth spit anyway, because they're all going to get destroyed or defeated by our 616 characters. So who cares? I mean, even the Wolverine we see in Deadpool versus Wolverine, or Deadpool and Wolverine, is defeated. He's a sad sack Wolverine. So the entire multiverse, they've undermined the very idea of a multiverse because, I liked in What If when we got, Infinity Stones, Ultron. Bring on that. Have them kill everybody. I love that shit. That was great. But anyway, I'm rambling. Let's get to the article that was in Variety and see what they have to say. Super burnout. With most superhero movies flopping, can Marvel and DC's 2025 slates reverse an unprecedented box office drought? By Adam B. Very. Sony Pictures billed Venom: The Last Dance as the final chapter in Tom Hardy's alien symbiote buddy comedy franchise. But with its $51 million domestic opening weekend, 44% and 55% lower than the previous two installments, the movie also signifies the continued twilight of superhero cinema as the dominant force at the box office. Superhero movies used to be an indispensable revenue driver for the film industry. In 2018 and 2019, the average global gross for superhero fare was more than $1 billion. This year, it's half that, even with the record-breaking success of Deadpool and Wolverine. In fact, the Ryan Reynolds-Hugh Jackman vehicle is the only comic book movie that could qualify as a hit since Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse debuted in June of 2023. Since then, the genre has suffered an extraordinary box office drought. Film after film, from The Flash to The Marvels to Madam Web, open to, at best, a shrug, and at worst, outright rejection. Joker, Folie à Deux, is on track to earn the ignominious distinction of making less than its entire box office run than its predecessor's $248.4 million global opening weekend in 2019. I mean, think about that. Joker, Folie à Deux isn't even going to make what the first Joker grossed in its opening weekend. Now here, you see, this is a chart that shows the average box office gross from 2000 at the beginning up through 2024 of the box office grosses of superhero movies. Between 2015 and 2019, 25 out of 30 superhero titles, 83%, took in more than $500 million worldwide, some considerably so. After the pandemic, that dynamic has been flipped on its head. Since 2022, 10 of 17 superhero titles, 59%, have made less than $500 million globally, some considerably so. That's rather shocking. The reasons for the drop in box office performance vary from film to film. DC's output was hampered by a scandal and the knowledge that the franchise was rebooting under new leadership. Marvel had oversaturated the market with its Disney Plus shows and was already in the process of dialing back. Sony was trying to build a universe of live-action Spider-Man characters without Spider-Man. The overall impact, however, has been an unmistakable depreciation of the genre's commercial might. These stiff financial headwinds place an almost existential pressure on the 2025 superhero slate to deliver. After opening just Deadpool and Wolverine in 2024, Marvel Studios is ramping back up to 3 films: Captain America: Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and Fantastic Four: First Steps. There are no slam dunks here, says exhibitor relations analyst Jeff Bach. There's still a lot of goodwill for Marvel. It's still the biggest show in town. But to think that these are going to do Deadpool and Wolverine business, I just don't see that for any of these films. A significant factor facing Captain America 4 and Thunderbolts is how much they rely on characters and plot lines from several earlier MCU titles, including Disney Plus shows. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye and feature films like Black Widow, Eternals, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain America Civil War, and even 2008's The Incredible Hulk. That interconnectivity had been an advantage for Marvel Studios from its inception, but was seen as a hindrance for several recent projects like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, Secret Invasion, and The Marvels. The Fantastic Four, by contrast, is set in an alternate timeline, allowing the film to mark a fresh way forward that insiders say has energized the studio. Its characters could scarcely be more important to the Marvel Comics universe. They're called Marvel's first family for a reason, but 2 separate attempts at 20th Century Fox in the 2000s and 2010s to make them into marquee stars never caught fire. Marvel Studios can't afford for that to happen again. Robert Downey Jr. is already set to return as the team's arch nemesis, Dr. Doom, for 2026's Avengers Doomsday, and that film and 2027's Avengers Secret Wars will be directed by Joe and Anthony Russo, who helmed the last 2 Avengers movies to global grosses sailing past $2 billion. Marvel, in other words, has set for itself a formidably high bar for the reintroduction of these essential characters, and now has to clear it. So here is a chart of superhero cinema. Now I'll just scroll through this slowly, so you can. This is actually a really interesting chart. And look at how many superhero movies have actually come out. This is pretty astonishing. I mean, I think we're pushing 40 movies, 40 Marvel movies, which is pretty amazing. So, as I scroll through this, it is surprising to see these all grouped together this way. Wow. Just looking at this stuff, wow, makes my head spin. Fantastic Four has to perform better than Captain America and Thunderbolts because they want to ramp up into a couple of Avengers films back-to-back, Bach says. Marvel Studios is also committed to co-producing Sony Pictures' 4th Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland, which destined Daniel Cretton, is it Cretin? who directed Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings, will direct. Sony Animation is also in production on the third and final Spider-Verse movie, and the studio's TV division is making a Spider Noir with Nicolas Cage for Amazon. But the future of Sony's Spider-Man universe films made without Holland or Marvel Studios is in limbo. Although Venom: The Last Stand does end with a post-credit tease, there are currently no other SSU projects on the studio slate following the December release of the R-rated Kraven the Hunter with Aaron Taylor Johnson. Sony's Spider-Man universe hasn't fully imploded yet, but Venom is now feeling the gravity of the superhero spin-off squeeze, Box says. This isn't a great look for the studio, which at one time had fantasies of several Spider-Man titles each year. There's no doubt Sony needs to go back to the drawing board. The superhero stakes in 2025 are highest, however, for DC Studios. In January 2023, newly installed co-chiefs James Gunn and Peter Safran announced a brand new slate of 10 movies and TV shows that would relaunch the universe as a fully integrated creative endeavor. The first of these projects, the animated series Creature Commandos, debuts on Max in December, but the new DC universe takes flight in earnest with the release of Superman, written and directed by James Gunn. I don't think you can stress enough how important Superman is for the entire DC universe, Box says. This probably has to open with $100 million domestically, something DC hasn't been able to pull off in quite a long time. Aside from 2022's The Batman, which, like Joker Folie et Deux, was produced outside the DCEU, Warner Brothers and DC Films are really going to be at a turning point if Superman does not succeed. They will have to make some big decisions. Gunn and Safran's pledge that no DC project will move forward without a finished script also helps to mitigate risk for the company should Superman falter. Only two of their previously announced projects, the feature film Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow and the streaming series Lanterns, have entered production, along with the animated feature Dynamic Duo. Projects featuring less prominent characters like Booster Gold, Swamp Thing, and The Authority remain without a green light for now. Still, Warner Brothers and Disney remain steadfastly committed to their respective DC and Marvel slates well into this decade, and that doesn't look like it will change anytime soon. There still isn't anything to replace superheroes at the box office in terms of films with the potential to make that amount of money, Box says. Until we see some other genre take over, they're going to continue to invest in it. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting overview of where we're at in terms of superheroics on the big screen. The funny thing is, like I've always said that I think Marvel is an interesting case study to me because you can see where it lost its way. And where it lost its way was deciding to make a Black Widow movie as the beginning of Phase 4 after Black Widow was already dead. I mean, yes, you introduced her sister, and hey, Florence Pugh is great. I love her. She's sexy, she's funny, she's sassy, she can pull off an action sequence. I mean, she's got it going on. But at the end of the day, that was an underwhelming move. If that Black Widow movie had come out sometime around the first 10 movies or in Phase 1 or 2, it might have worked out a little better. But also, again, I think that movie it's a lot better than people seem to remember as a spy thriller. They should have leaned into the spy thriller nature of it more. I mean, of course, the big helicarrier collapsing ending was a little much, it should have been a more stripped down, vicious little movie, more like a John Wick. But of course, backdoor quarterbacking. Sometimes that's good. But Monday morning quarterbacking, in doing something like that, and then from then on, it never gained a foothold. There has been nothing going on. The phases 4 and 5 and 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe have been leading nowhere. I mean, to the point where they were leading to the Kang Dynasty, but that didn't work. Again, I think the TVA was an enormous mistake. An enormous mistake. And the TVA leading into Quantum Mania, why would you take your Ant-Man franchise and try and change it and turn it into this giant full-blown fantasy franchise? It seemed to me that you had a carefully planned out, or pretty carefully planned out, you had a story group at Marvel too, looking into these movies and really overseeing what they were going to be. I mean, if you go back and you watch The Winter Soldier,
that movie feels so very different to anything in phases 4 or 5. It feels like, call it a real movie. I mean, when the scene where Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson meet one another at the beginning of the film, that's a wonderful scene between two characters, two soldiers, two warriors. You don't get set in a real location, no green screen, nothing like that. You know, they're at the mall. I mean, not the shopping mall, but the mall in Washington, D.C. And it's a great moment watching these two soldiers bond. Mutual respect. I mean, really terrifically done. Really well done. And you watch that whole movie, and it's light years ahead of anything we've had. And look, I liked Shang-Chi quite a bit. I wish they had leaned into the original Doug Mensch. I was talking about this last night. Paul Gulacy version of the character. Bruce Lee meets James Bond. Of course, that's not what happened in the comics. But that film, again, adding these weird fantasy realms. I like the Ten Rings. Why couldn't it have just been a criminal organization? Suddenly what's happening in Shang-Chi went into this, I understand it's a wuxia movie, but it's going into this fantasy realm. Where is that realm in relation to Captain America, the Winter Soldier? The interesting thing about it, if you watch how the Infinity Saga developed, I mean, the crazy wackiness was saved for the cosmic area. You can go wherever you want cosmically. But on Earth was, for the most part, pretty down to earth. And once James Gunn was given the reins of Guardians of the Galaxy, then you could put Groot and Rocket Raccoon together and really fantasy up the joint. And it worked because it was earned. It was earned. But on Earth, suddenly when you're watching Shang-Chi and you're dealing with going into these fantasy realms, I know they have to introduce that at some point, but those didn't fit. And as much as I like Shang-Chi, you have now broken the carefully established verisimilitude of the MCU. Same was true of Eternals. As much as I might have liked Eternals, it seemed completely removed. Maybe they should have done that on a different Earth. I don't know, because even though they talked about events that took place in the MCU, how are they so disconnected? And why are they still fighting these deviants? Where these deviants still exist on Earth? I mean, I think that even the conception of what the deviants were supposed to be, they had a really interesting opportunity to add mutation to what was going on. Of course, they didn't. And what was really, really interesting, too, you know, there was a comic series that came out, Axe, Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals. And Druig decided that in the Krakoan era of X-Men, if you've read the Krakoan era of X-Men, they had the power of resurrection to cheat death. And so Druig is like, well, that's too much of a deviation. Mutation's one thing, but once you can start to cheat death, you've gone too far. So Druig was like, time to call the X-Men. That was a really interesting idea. I thought that was, and I was a fan of Hickman's Krakoan era as long as he was writing it. But there was some interesting stuff that the Krakoan era of X-Men brought in that made me fascinated by that. But when you're dealing with the multiverse and you're dealing with the TVA and you're dealing with everything that we've seen in stages 4 and 5 of the MCU, none of it holds together. Why did we see a Shang-Chi movie? Why give us a Shang-Chi movie if Shang-Chi has no relation to anything that's come after yet? You know, it's like everything was going into these cul-de-sacs, these dead ends. Nothing's tying together. Now we have Agatha All Along. That's basically a sequel to WandaVision and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Where is that going? I don't know. But it seems mundane. It seems ordinary. It doesn't seem special anymore. And I think that's the real problem. It's the real problem with any genre. When the genre is not exceeding and it's not taking you places you haven't been already, and it's not showing things you haven't seen, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I think it's really problematic in the sense that the reason that the comic book movies are failing is because they are no longer stimulating the imagination of the audiences. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And I think, you know, after the Infinity Saga is over, what you do is think of it as a double album set. You know, you take out the second LP, and what you should do is reset and go back in and do what they did with Iron Man 1. Tell us a simple story. And, you know, I've talked about how when James Bond went into space in 1979 for Moonraker, well, what are you going to do? When you go into space, you're either going to be ridiculous forever, or what you do is you bring it back down to Earth and you make Spy Who Loved Me. You go back to, not Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only.
which is 81. Spy Love Me was 1977. Sorry. There's too much stuff in my head. What can I say? So anyway, it was a mistake. Now, why am I a huge... Oh, it's pouring. Wait a minute. Hang on a second. It's pouring down rain. And there's something leaking here. Why do I think James Gunn's Superman movie, why do I have such high hopes for it? People are like, I'll tell you why. Costumes aside, complain and bitch and moan all you want. I think that James Gunn's Superman movie is going to give us a movie that's tone is vastly different from any of the superhero movies that we've seen before. We are going to get literally a fantasy world, a full-blown fantasy world where that we have not seen before, which is going to be, in a way, what the DC universe was sort of in the 80s. All of this stuff exists. There's all kinds of super people. There's probably super science. There's all kinds of craziness. And it's not going to be so much set in the real world as we know it. He's going to give us a heightened fantasy version of the DCEU. He's not going to try and convince us that this movie is taking place in our universe. If anything, it'll be a Norman Rockwell version of our universe. You know, it's going to be that painted version of it's going to be that heightened version of where we're going. And I think only James Gunn can do that because he understands how to work with that tone. He's been doing that his whole life. And people say, oh, is it going to be like Peacemaker? No, I think it's going to be much more earnest. I think he's going to lean into the classical nature of it all. He's going to lean into, maybe there's going to be a little Capra-esque. Can you imagine a superhero universe with a Capra-esque sensibility to it? Or something like, you know, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington meets, well, you name it. And I think that's what we're going to get. And I'm excited for that because it's going to be something we haven't seen. Now, I also think that if it fails, I mean, they'll probably make Lanterns and they'll probably make Supergirl. If James Gunn's Superman does not work, the new DCEU is dead on arrival. They can continue to make superhero movies, but they might, because they've already put them in production. But I can tell you this, that'll be the end. I don't think in terms of plans that have been made, I don't know, I can't think of a single movie that is more important to a studio in terms of moving forward its agenda than Superman is. If Superman doesn't work, and remember, they'll know opening day. They'll know the Thursday it opens for previews. They'll know within moments whether or not what James Gunn has done will work. They'll know, we'll get advanced screenings and people will start talking about it, but no one's going to really know until that opening weekend. And if it doesn't succeed, like the article said, $100 million minimum, that will be the end of the DC universe. They will finish up what they've already started, but Warner Brothers is going to get out of the superhero business, at least for the foreseeable future. And that's why I find the whole thing very interesting. I work with James Gunn. I like James Gunn very much. He's a very creative guy. He's very smart. He's a lot of fun to hang out with. And he knows his shit. He knows his shit. And he also knows this is his to lose. And here, you literally have one man who holds the future of an entire studio's franchise plans in the palm of his hand. So he better not fuck up. But is there really superhero fatigue? Yes. I think now we can all honestly say that there is. I mean, I appreciate Joker 2, Joker Folie à Deux. I appreciate it very much. I thought it was a beautifully made movie, but I think it did everything it could to alienate its audience. Todd Phillips was almost, I mean, that's what he was doing. He literally made a movie that told you why you shouldn't love superhero movies. Which I thought was kind of genius. And him, I mean, coming from the man who made that documentary about Gigi Allen, I'm like, you go, Todd Phillips. The problem is, that's not what the audience wanted. Certainly didn't want that from a Joker movie. And I understand. I get it. But what do you guys think? I don't know. I just thought I would jump on and you know, talk to you about this and see what you guys thought. And we shall see. I'll find out. Let's see what you guys, if you have, maybe nobody has anything to say. I don't know. Let me check. And first of all, wow, a lot of people have stuff to say. Amazing.
John from New York sends in 2 super chats, $30. Thank you, John from New York. Rob, I too read this article today, and it misses a major point. These underperforming films did not have what you or I would call competent storytelling. I agree. I don't consider what the Marvel or DC marketing try to tell me. Otherwise, theater attendees have become more selective when it comes to spending money. And they definitely don't want to waste money on mediocre content. I sure don't. I mean, look, I agree with you. It's to me, look, I think one of the real problems in terms of what's going on is obviously in terms of the MCU, Kevin Feige, they lost their story group, and Kevin Feige was spread way too thin. You know, making 3 movies at once is fine, but here's something that is not understood. Movies and IP is not just a brand. Something became an IP because it was good and it created its own audience. And I think the biggest IP, the newest IP, is the John Wick franchise. You have 4 movies, you have a TV series, you have Ballerina coming out, they're going to make more. The John Wick, that was an IP that came out of nowhere. The first John Wick movie, not expensive, delivered on what it wanted to do. And it became a franchise because people loved it, and it kept delivering. I found the 4th John Wick movie, they're beautifully made. A little thin, though, in terms of what's going on. I mean, how many times can you see John Wick shoot somebody in the head? I used to think, well, as many times as you can serve it up, but it gets to the point where even that's a little boring, but that's all right. Those movies clearly have people that love making them. That's what they're doing. When Disney Plus wants to launch a streaming service and they expect Marvel and they expect Star Wars to carry it, the thought process there is wrong-headed. You cannot expect from a corporation thinks, oh, IP, we just make more of the IP. See, there's nowhere on a corporate spreadsheet, I've said this a million times, which talks about how to make something good. Because they don't know. People in Hollywood without an IP don't know how to make things good. You know, I think great filmmakers know how to make good things. I mean, there are films, it's interesting, because if you look at Christopher Nolan's track record, like, I don't particularly love Tenet, but it's beautifully made. And I think that if you look at Christopher Nolan, if you look at his track record, if you go all the way back to his first film, Following, you know, and then Memento, and then Insomnia, when he became a studio director, his Batman movies, Inception, The Prestige, Interstellar, Dunkirk. I mean, he's a pretty safe bet. He's a genre unto himself. A24 as a studio is becoming a genre unto itself. I mean, I know people that tell me, oh, the new A24 movie's coming out. I've never heard that in my life. I would never have said, you know, the new Paramount film's coming out, or the new Universal movie's coming out. People are saying the new A24 movie's coming out. I used to think people might be saying that about Blumhouse, but Blumhouse is, you know, diversified. But A24 as its own genre, A24 studio as IP. Crazy, but cool. I have my A24 membership, and when my birthday rolled around, they said, pick your free gift, and I got the movie Lamb on Blu-ray from them for free. They didn't even charge me shipping. You go, A24. You go. But I don't know what... the fact is, they overextend themselves. They think that something with a Marvel branding or a Super Star Wars branding or whatever branding, that people are going to watch it. Because that's what a corporation thinks. Actually, a corporation doesn't think, but a corporation is designed to believe that if they have a product to sell, that product is just going to sell based on the past. But when it comes to IP, it has to be good. And if you were to go to ask... You know, even if you ask Bob Iger, okay, Bob, pitch me the ultimate Star Wars movie. He couldn't do it. He doesn't know. He's not a fan. You know, what they do then is they go to look at people and they think, okay, on this spreadsheet, these are the best people to handle what's going on. I'll tell you what I'm most excited about, just because I know him a little bit. I think that Terry Matalas working on Vision, coming off of Star Trek when you're dealing with a character like Data, I think that Terry Matalas is going to do something really interesting from a creator's point of view. I don't know anything. He has not said word one to me about what's going on with the Vision TV show, nor will he. I mean, he specifically, we became friends because of Picard Season 3, specifically because I have a big mouth. He wanted me to promote that show. He doesn't want me to have a big mouth with Marvel. So it's exactly the opposite. And I don't take that personally. He's right. He was probably told not to say a word to me. And that's the right thing to do. So I don't know. I mean, we're going to see what happens, and they need to make things that are good. And I think right now nobody knows what that is. I think James Gunn does. And I think when we see, I mean, a lot of people always throw back at me that, oh, well, what about Suicide Squad? James Gunn's Suicide Squad's great. It was released day and date, and I think that movie really holds up. I really like it. It might not be your cup of tea, just like Peacemaker might not be, but definitely the quality was there. No one can say he phoned those in, because he certainly didn't. But it comes down to, you need great creators that really know what they're doing. So John from New York, that's what I think. Dee's Webbos has been a member of the channel for 24 months. The Dead Man says, I like your discussion with Angry Badger. I think you both made good points. I think that there are good Star Wars stories to be told, but not under Disney. Sadly, we're all probably going to be dead before that happens. Angry Badger and I went on, we were on Versus today going at it. Look, my whole thing is, and I think there's something I need to make people understand about me personally and how I come to my favorite things like Star Trek and Star Wars. So for me, I was watching these things when they didn't exist. So when I came to Star Wars for the first time, I was 10 years old. I saw it opening weekend. Changed my life. It really did. It changed my perspective on films. It changed my perspective on fantasy filmmaking. It changed my perspective on a lot of things. And it was an amazing time to be alive and see it. Now, that how much of a fan I was, and also I was watching all of these things that were being made by filmmakers that decided to make these things and put themselves out on a limb. George Lucas didn't know, even when he was deep into editorial on Star Wars, whether it would even work or not. Him and Spielberg lit off to Hawaii when it opened because he thought it was going to be a failure. But Star Wars was the product of, it wasn't just Lucas, it was all the people. It was like Marshall Lucas, it was like producer Gary Kurtz, it was like Paul Hirsch, and it was like Richard Chew who helped edit that film. The people that were working on that movie knew how to elevate it. I don't know if George Lucas was left to his own devices, if he didn't have the collaborators he had. Gary Kurtz, they were trying to make a mythical film that appealed not to kids, but to everybody. And they did. And I don't have to, it's not a retcon for me to say it. It happened. I was there, and when Empire Strikes Back came out, I saw it 26 times in the theater. It was an amazing plussing of the Star Wars franchise. And then, although I get yelled at all the time, Return of the Jedi to me was a huge step down. And that's when Lucas basically took the franchise back. No, this is for kids. And he knew how lucrative it was to make sure that everything was merchandised. But Return of the Jedi, even the way it's made and photographed, I mean, you have R2 and 3PO getting pulled out of the sand on the way off of Jabba's sail barge. I mean, that film was, to me, a huge step down, and we can talk about that all you want. But to me, Star Wars is a franchise that, if you grew up in a world where Star Wars existed, I get why you're a fan of it. But I grew up in a world where there was no Star Wars, and then there suddenly was Star Wars, and I've watched it. To me, in my mind, there are two great Star Wars movies, Star Wars and Empire, and everything else is a step down. There have been great Star Wars stories told in the Extended Universe books and in the Dark Horse comics, which is great, but since Disney's had it, it's just been diminishing returns. Because I don't think Disney is the company that thought that Star Wars was impervious to any kind of criticism, that when people made Star Wars, it was just good. I think when Bob Iger thought that he was acquiring Star Wars, he thought he was acquiring the new Pixar. No. Star Wars needed Pixar. They needed the storytellers at Pixar to make Star Wars movies. That's what I would have done. I would have gone back to, talk about the biggest flop in the world. You want to talk about John Carter, but John Carter was a better Star Wars movie than The Phantom Menace. Changed my mind. So, Chairman Meow says, what did you think of Megalopolis? Everybody's been asking me this. Honestly, I appreciated the ambition. I'm a huge Coppola fan. Godfather and Godfather 2 are two of my favorite movies of all time. But I am not beyond disliking a Coppola movie. I even like The Rainmaker. I
when I first saw it, I've come to appreciate it, but when I first saw Coppola's Dracula, which I was so excited for, I hated it. I liked Wojciech Kilar's score. I love Gary Oldman and his makeup, but that movie was so... I even like the old-timey special effects that Roman Coppola was creating. But man, I hated that movie. I called it Bombfire of the Vanities. Or, pardon me, Bombfire of the Vampires when I walked out of it. I was so mad. I wasn't mad about Megalopolis. I just was... Megalopolis, I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed the experience. I don't think it's a good movie. I really wanted it to be a good movie. But I think that it was too... What I wanted was Apocalypse Now, and what I got was Coppola's Dracula. If that makes any sense. I mean, it was just all over the place. And I wanted to love it. Oh, I'm going to buy it. And I will enjoy... I enjoyed watching it. I just don't think it's very good. If that makes any sense. But it was wacky. And I'm glad he got to make it. He spent his own money. What balls, you know. Rebel Sky says, Rob, sir, it's been a minute. But you were on Versus earlier, and I wanted to add your great arguments about Star Wars that I was right. You were right. So I'm within my Star Trek novel called Star Wars: The Return of Anakin Skywalker. I have a story I'd like to see. I'd like you to see. Well, here's the thing. I had to draw a line. I can't look at anyone's stories. I mean, for legal reasons, I can't, because I'm making my own. When I'm making my own things, if I were to make something, because I have a lot of stuff that I have in development and in various stages of, if I were to make something that would have anything along the lines of what you were writing, and you'd send me something that you could come back and say, oh, I stole an idea. I just haven't. Normally I'd have to have somebody sign a release form that absolves me of any responsibility. But so I've had to stop looking at people's work, and it's not because I don't want to see it or don't want to support the work that's being done. From a legal perspective, I just can't do it unless I had you sign a release form. So I apologize. But here's what I would tell you. Here's what I would say. If you want to see a Star Wars story I've learned, I was really a big proponent of fan fiction, but I see so much fan fiction now, many talented people working in various phases of fan fiction. I would suggest to everybody, change it and make it your own. If you're going to spend that much time writing or developing a story, there's no reason why you can't alter it and turn it. Remember, Star Wars itself was George Lucas wanting to do Flash Gordon, but he couldn't get the rights. So he ended up making Star Wars instead. So rather than write fan fiction about your favorite IP, turn it into something new. It's got more of a future, and you never know where that will wind up. Care About You says, Rob, I love your show. Just when I think I'm getting tired of movies, I see something new that I haven't seen before, and I'm completely enchanted. I hope you feel the same way. Stay metal. Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. That's a very nice thing for you to say. No, there's always something. I'm not finding a lot of things domestically that float my boat, but there's always something out there that I really like. This new Richard Gere, Michael Fassbender series, The Agency. It's probably, it's a spy show. We've seen 10 million variations on a theme, but it looked good. I can't wait to see it. There's a lot of interesting stuff coming out. The Sisterhood, the Dune TV series. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Where's that going to go? I don't know, but I really want to see it. I'm glad it's coming. Can't wait. So I'm still, by the way, that's your 5th super chat you sent me, it says. And I want to thank you for supporting the channel. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting, the new Nicole Kidman movie about she's having an affair with the younger intern. That looks hot. Want to see that. Speaking of which, Sonny Dominguez says, could you imagine if Gunn's Superman causes a superhero revival and sends the genre into a new different direction? Fingers crossed. Well, I think it has to. I think James Gunn's Superman might wind up being the most comic booky, and yet it's going to be an interesting amalgamation of 80s DC, Norman Rockwell classicism, maybe the Fleischer Superman a little bit, and Frank Capra. That's what I think we're going to get, with all kinds of action and adventure. Something like that.
Tom Jr. Jackson says, Rob, your thoughts on Warner Brothers giving up on Juror number 2 by not putting it in more theaters? Do you think they are done with Eastwood? Your thoughts? So for those of you who don't know, Clint Eastwood is 94 years old now. He has a movie coming out he directed called Juror number 2, which, by the way, is getting good notices. I think I know. So here's the thing about Juror number 2. It's an adult drama. It's adult legal thriller, adult drama, legal thriller. And they're putting it in 50 theaters and only 50 theaters, as opposed to, it originally started life as a streaming film anyway. I think they're giving it a cursory release to honor Eastwood. But the problem is the studio is not in the business of making those kinds of movies anymore. They'll let Clint Eastwood make whatever he wants. But after the non-success of Cry Macho, that movie is too small for Warner Brothers to release. It doesn't have enough of a hook. They're not going to put $25 million to market that movie because they know they're not going to get it back. But they give it a release. People are trying to make something more of it than I think it is. The reviews are coming out and saying it's pretty good. But I understand it's not Warner Brothers' normal bill of fare. And so they're not going to give it a major theatrical release because it can't make any money for them. And they know that. So I don't think it's a slight. I don't think Clint Eastwood's ever going to make another movie. He's 94. I think you should hang it up. By the way, Tom Jr. Jackson gifted a Burnettwork membership. So I thank you for that. The Dead Man says, I favor Kubrick over Coppola. Oh, Stanley Kubrick's my favorite director of all time. Coppola makes different kinds of movies, although Stanley Kubrick did say The Godfather was one of the greatest movies ever made. Captain Robert April says, I've got a Coppola Dracula story to tell you. Well, one day you can do just that. I'd love to hear what that story is. 1001 Johnny says, he sent in a tip for this. He meant this for the last show. Not being able to read, I wonder if Joker 2 would have had more success if the modern audiences read more. They might recognize tragedy as a genre. Honestly, I think that's an interesting thing to say. I think Joker 2 gave the audience nothing that it wanted. I think that was the real problem. And I don't even know if it succeeded doing what it was doing. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Joker 2. I enjoyed the crazy ambition of it. I enjoyed the fact that that was the story they wanted to tell. I think nobody wanted to make a sequel, but Todd Phillips had total creative control and he used it. Unfortunately, and with a budget of $200 million, if they had made that movie I know the first one cost 65, but once you've made $1 billion for the studio on a $65 million spend, everyone's going to get paid. I think ultimately they should have left it alone, because now they've diminished the IP, which is kind of a bummer. But I don't know. I don't know where it's going to wind up, but they're not going to make it's going to be a huge loss for the studio. Your break even on that $600 million. It's barely eked past $200 million. So they're probably going to lose. It's going to be one of the biggest disasters in cinema history, to be honest. Which is, well, maybe not, but it'll come close. 1001 Johnny says, heightened fantasy. I dare say all are afraid of whimsical stories. I don't see whimsical as inherently not grounded, but what they are grounded in is relatability. Realism only goes so far, and the demand, I think, hurts imagination. Look, I love whimsy. Amelie is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that's very, very whimsical, but it balances the reality and the comedy and the whimsy in an interesting way. I think one of the reasons that anime or manga is kicking Asian fantasy literature in terms of graphic literature is kicking the ass of America is because all of it's so different. And all of it is, if you read manga, I was reading Blom. I was told it's called Blom, not Blame. It's amazing. It's incredible. We don't have the conviction. Our creators don't have that kind of, we can't do that. In the West, we don't have that whimsy. One of the reasons I Leiji Matsumoto or Matsumoto Leiji's stuff, the reason I like, Galaxy Express and Captain Harlock and Space Battleship Yamato is the whimsy. It's whimsical to put a battleship in space as a space battleship, but everything surrounding it isn't whimsical. And I think that's the key, is that when you see Howl's Moving Castle, Howl's Moving Castle itself is very whimsical, but everything else going around that movie is not. It's all based in real human emotion. So you've got a whimsical center, but you have real human pathos and emotion surrounding it. And I think that's why Japanese fantasy works as well as it does. And it also there's a romanticism. There's all of these sort of, in a way, sort of core not conservative, but traditional values that are surrounding these unbelievably, whether they're whimsical or huge fantasy ideas. And I think that's the secret. I mean, it's emotion. People feel. You watch something like Your Name, or Weathering with You, or Belle. Those are three recent anime films that have come out. I really enjoyed them. And they're touching. The same way that Miyazaki's stuff can be touching, whether you're watching My Neighbor Totoro or Nausicaa or, take your pick. And there's Princess Mononoke. I mean, there's the whimsy, but there's also the grounded humanity. And I think that's a staple of especially Japanese genre stuff. But I think you're right. But we don't know how to do that in America. And when we do whimsy, we go too far. We don't know how to do earnest whimsy. We're either too snarky or we go into the comedy realm. We can't do earnest whimsy in the United States. That's just not our way. I'm not saying somebody can't do that. I'm sure somebody could do that, but I don't know if we actually know how to do that. By the way, Sonny Dominguez has been a member of this channel. He's also the king of squirting, but he's been a member of this channel for 40 months. Ben Johnson sends in a super chat and says, I'm just listening. Well, thank you for that. RRTNZ says, the Benny Gesserit iron shirts for Chuck Norris. That's pretty funny. I like that. But thank you for that. I very much appreciate that. But yeah, I could be full of shit. I don't know. I mean, I try and bring some kind of acumen to all of these things. I mean, because I think about them all the time. And now as I bring you True Noir, I'm working within a genre that I want to honor first and foremost, and luckily I've got a great story. So anyway, I mean, I'm always curious. I want superhero movies to succeed. I want Star Wars to succeed. I want Star Trek to succeed. I mean, I don't I love science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and I want it to succeed. I think the horror genre is pretty healthy. There's a lot of really interesting horror cinema being made around the world, and we got bangers like at least I hope it is, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu coming out. Really looking forward to that. There's a lot of really interesting, I'll tell you, Francis Lawrence, produced by executive producer Roy Lee, one of my most eagerly awaited movies, a movie I've wanted to see since junior high school in the early 80s, is the adaptation of Richard Bachman, a.k.a. Stephen King's seminal novel that he wrote under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, The Long Walk. The Long Walk is coming out, and Francis Lawrence, who did Constantine, he directed it, and I can't wait to see that movie. As a matter of fact, Roy Lee's got a couple of movies on the slate that I really want to see. The Companion. I read that script. That script was really good. He's got a couple other things. I know he's producing Zach Krieger's mysterious movie Weapon, his follow-up to Barbarian. What's that about? I can't tell you even if I knew. But hey, can't wait to see that. There's a lot of good stuff coming down the pike. And look, do I want Captain America and Brave New World to be good? Yes. Do I think it's going to be? Probably not. From everything that we've heard. Maybe they'll keep reshooting it until they get it right. Thunderbolts looks fun. Fantastic Four, the jury's still out. I mean, it's funny to me, I never thought, and whatever they're going to do with Doomsday, I think Marvel's on very shaky ground, to be honest. I think Daredevil Born Again looks like one of the best things they have coming out. I'm excited for Daredevil Born Again. I'm excited for Terry Metalis' Vision series. But all the way up through, Marvel's got to earn my trust and interest. So let's see. John from New York says, I hope you're right about Superman and Gunn, but they have to let the man cook. Warner Brothers can't have any knee-jerk reactions. Oh, I know. And I don't think they will. Remember, he's also the head. James Gunn's also the head of the studio. He knows what he's doing. I mean, look, I think the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is one of the great science fiction fantasy trilogies of all time. I really do. You know, I really enjoy the second one more than a lot of people, but those three films are incredibly entertaining. Why? Those characters are entertaining. And James Gunn knows how to do whimsy. He does. B Things, ooh, this is really interesting. B Thing says, regarding anime versus the US, I heard a description once that One Piece is a serious story in a silly world, where Pirates of the Caribbean is a silly story in a serious world. That's like one of the great descriptions I've ever heard. I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, one of the things, look at, like, I love my real robot stories. I love Mobile Suit Gundam. And Gundam is a very serious story. The entire Gundam, well, not the entire Gundam franchise, but the Universal Century Gundam, what would you call that? That universe, that Gundam universe, the Universal Century, the Prime Gundam universe, I guess. That's a very serious universe about the futility of war. And lots of people die, and I think it's really, really good. But then you get to G-Fighters or whatever. It gets a little wacky. But they can do that. 1001 Johnny says, how to be whimsical, be authentic, be imaginative. Joker 2 will be a box office failure, it seems, but it was what I expected. It was whimsical, tragic, and no mercy for the wicked or jokers. I mean Arthur, not the audience. Hey, I agree. That's why I think people around the world take it for what it is. I mean, the problem is we have certain expectations about what a Joker movie should be, and it wasn't that. So, unfortunately, the fate of the Joker is not a good fate, which is unfortunate. Well, on that note, I'm going to keep this show short and sweet. And first of all, I want to thank, one of the things I really appreciate this show from you guys and girls and gentle beings and kind souls, however you identify. It's a great audience. You guys are a great audience. You imagination connoisseurs are always thought-provoking. Great stuff. The Dead Man says, I watched M.E.'s Nosferatu, and wow, they did a great job. It was the first time I've ever seen that movie. Are you talking about the original Nosferatu, the silent film? Or are you talking about Klaus Kinski's Nosferatu? Well, the movie that Klaus Kinski's in. But yeah, the Nosferatu, the original, Max Schreck is amazing as Nosferatu, and love it. And, if you guys haven't seen Nosferatu or Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, two of the great one of the greatest horror movies of all time and one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time were silent films made in Germany. Nosferatu and Fritz Lang's Metropolis. You can get both films. You can watch them. I would recommend watching them. Put yourself in a mindset. It's always a party here in the Robservatory because you know everybody. So that was a little rap reference for you. It's like being a county. Anyway, I'm off subject. But hey, so everybody, I want to thank you all for being here. 1001 Johnny says, happy birthday, Rob. Cheers. You guys are great. Since February, since Tom Jr. Jackson started this, it is now October. It is going to be November, and you're still wishing me a happy birthday party, or happy birthday. God love you. God love you. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to say thanks to Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator, and all of you people for being a great audience. And let's hope. Hey, we got the Sisterhood coming down the pike. We got all kinds of stuff. There's good stuff. So I want to thank everybody for supporting this channel via super chats and tips and all that. And listen, Lucas Di Fiore says he says, what is my Mount Rushmore of directors? Ooh, that's a tough one. for me personally, if you were going to ask who is my Mount Rushmore of directors, I would say Kubrick, Kurosawa, Hitchcock, Truffaut, Antonioni, Sergio Leone, Frank Capra. See, now I'm spinning off into oblivion. I got to put Spielberg, Scorsese. There's too many. Mount Rushmore was what, 5 people? 4 people? It's too much because, I keep thinking about directors from all around the world. Tarkovsky would be on there. But if I could only pick 4, I don't. If I could only pick 4, I would probably say I would have to pick. Let's say I only pick 4. Is there 4? There's 4 faces on Rushmore, right? So I would pick Kubrick, Kurosawa, I can't do it. I can't pick 4. I mean, Bergman. It's too hard. I need like a mountain with 20 people on it. That's what I would need. I need like 20 people. It's too hard. I can't do it. I can't stand them. I can't do it. The Dead Man says Midnight's Edge update. In terms of Midnight Musings, you mean with Lael and our midnight shows with Dave Parker, or I don't and Lael would be Midnight Musings. Midnight's Edge is a different channel than mine, but I love everybody, Andre and Tom. So I don't know what you mean by that. RRTNZ says, in Robius, when Grob growled, "It's Robin time," and robbed his Rob all over the villains who were robbed into oblivion, it was orgasmic. You honor me, sir. You honor me. You do honor me. By the way, I did in fact see Gladiator 2. I recommend it highly. Does it reach the heights of the first Gladiator? It's a different movie. But man, was it a satisfying experience. It's the Top Gun Maverick of Gladiator movies. So, and look, on that note, everybody, I am going to get off this stream. I'm going to say one more thing. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, have a better night. And I'll probably be back tomorrow.